Lyndsey's request to her family is, can I stay the night at my friend's house before we go to Oregon? It's the last time I'm probably going to be able to see her in a really long time. It's a 15-year-old girl who had her whole life in front of her. It's Sunday morning, 4 a.m. Deborah wakes up to the sound of like a loud pop. She sees Lyndsey and she literally can't believe what she's seeing.
The sleepover remaining a modern nightmare for some parents.
I don't know who mom and dad have coming in and out.
I would never, ever, ever, ever let them do a sleepover.
A chilling 911 call leading to a brutal murder scene.
Sir, we have a bad connection. Where are you at?
Welcome to Socialite Crime Club. How would you like to prepare socialites for today's episode?
I'm going to talk about one of the more gut-wrenching crime scenes I've ever worked. It does involve a child. For some people, this may not be a good episode to jump in on. We're not going to show pictures, be completely inappropriate with what we're going to discuss. And listener discretion is advised. So as the intro said, this one's going to be a little brutal. I wore my toucan shirt today.
I love your toucan shirt. That's actually one of my favorite shirts that you wear. I love the pearlized little buttons on it.
I was hoping.
I guess they're iridescent, not really pearl.
Well, it's hard to be like emotional and sad when you're wearing toucans. So for those of you at home, if you zoom in, they're little tiny toucans.
I know, it's my favorite.
It was intentional.
You actually wore that shirt to the Derby, and I really love that.
The Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
You know, that's a fun story that we should start with. So we went to the Kentucky Derby 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we showed up on a Saturday for the main race. And when we got there, there was this horse that was at 98-1 odds. And I started reading about this horse. It wasn't even supposed to be at the Derby.
Right.
They got a call at the last minute, had to throw the horse in the trailer and like cannonball across the country just to get there. And it was Rich Strike was the horse.
Yes. This was our first Derby that we've ever been to. Our first horse race. Well, at least it was mine. I don't know if you've ever been to any before. No. But I had no idea how placing bets on horses worked. I had no idea the timing and structure. I had no idea that you could do this online. This is all very new to me.
And we used to bet on horses at the county fair when I was a kid. So I understood a lot of it, but I thought 98-1 odds. Yeah, I'll drop some money on that. And I think I bet $100 for that horse. And then I bet a lot more money on a different horse that was supposed to do really well. And that was the one that was going to be my big payoff. And I totally forgot about the other horse. Mm-hmm. I'm watching the horse I bet a lot of money on. He did miserable.
I think everybody bet a lot of money on that horse.
And then the stupid other horse, Red Stripe, won.
It wasn't Red Stripe. So the horses come in, there's all this energy and excitement, and people realize that the horse that they wanted to win didn't win. And the announcers announce the winning horse, and Cy has this total look of disappointment. He says, I didn't even know there was a horse called Red Stripe, because that's what it sounded like the announcer said. And I said, it wasn't Red Stripe, dingbat. It was Rich Strike. I'm like, you won.
Which I bet at 98-1 odds. And I'm trying to do the math in my head.
And I was like, you won. And he had this like dumbfounded look on his face. And I could see his mind suddenly processing the math like a third grader in his head. And it was amazing because there were all these very elitist people around us who were very upset that we won, or that Cy won, this like schmuck guy coming in for the first time to the Derby
with the schmuck horse.
Yeah, with a schmuck horse. It was actually a really fun experience.
It paid for the whole trip.
It did pay for the whole trip. That was a lot of fun.
It was awesome. All right.
So anyhow, that's where he last wore that shirt, and it reminded me of that. So yeah, good memory before we get into a very difficult
Good way to start. All right, let's go back to 2006. Okay. Sleepy little town of Gilbert, Arizona again. And those of you who have been watching a little bit, when we start talking about Gilbert, it's a suburb of Phoenix. So just think suburb of Phoenix. It's on the east side of Phoenix. 2006, Lyndsey Miles. She's 15 years old. And I screwed up. I have to own a screw up.
Okay.
When we were planning this episode, my memory was Lyndsey had just graduated from the 8th grade. And we named this episode Graduation Day. As I was prepping the final part of this episode and doing some of my final fact checking to make sure everything is accurate, she had just finished her freshman year. And it's too late to change things. So we're going to keep it Graduation Day just because. But I was, for some reason, my memory, granted it was 18 years ago, my memory was she had just graduated the 8th grade.
I wonder if you were associating that with, oh my gosh, like she's so close to being done with high school.
I think I was associating it with my kids.
Oh, that would make sense.
Yeah. Well, Lyndsey Miles, who's 15, Her family has been in Arizona most of her childhood. She has obviously some really good friends. She's moving to Oregon. Okay. So they're allowing her to finish the school year. And then as soon as she gets out of school, they're taking off. Lyndsey's request to her family is, can I stay the night at my friend's house before we go to Oregon? It's the last time I'm probably going to be able to see her in a really long time.
Sure.
And of course, the families are pretty close. They know each other. Lyndsey's stayed there multiple times, so it's not a big deal. The house she's going to stay at belongs to Deborah Radnour, and it's Deborah's daughter that Lyndsey's really good friends with. Deborah lives right behind the police department, so at least it's close.
It was close by.
It was very close.
Yeah.
She's a single mom. She kind of runs a daycare, if I remember right, or some type of a child care thing out of her house. She's struggling to make ends meet. She doesn't have a lot of money, like most single moms with young kids. She's got a friend that she went to high school with, male. No sexual, no relationship status, but he's back in the Phoenix area and he needs a place to stay. Okay. So Deborah decides to rent a room out to him. And this is to Michael Craig Lance.
And he was 40 at the time?
He's 40 at the time. He's got 3 first names.
Michael Craig Lance. Yes, the man with 3 first names.
Yeah, so we'll just call him Michael. He's unemployed. He's living on Social Security. Should probably touch on this just a little bit.
Okay.
I've worked enough cases, and I don't want to throw shade on certain people who might be
I'm looking at your notes here, and
offended.
I'm feeling like this is a very opinionated thing to say, which makes me nervous.
It's backed up by some experience.
Okay. Personal experience?
If you're taking your child to an in-home daycare where the mom is renting a room out to a 40-year-old single male who doesn't have a job and is just living off of Social Security, I'm not judging. I'm just saying there may be issues in that household. You should probably take a second thought.
Maybe a little bit of a red flag popping up.
Yeah, and I don't want to be mean about it, but
it is a bit concerning.
It is a bit concerning. Now, Michael's got some history. He's a veteran. He was in the Navy. He actually served in the Persian Gulf War back in the late 80s, early 90s. Not a lot of information about Michael out there. He's pretty much just a loner. He's very quiet, keeps to himself, isn't working, loves to smoke. We're going to get into that. He smokes a lot. He's just a little off. So it's just a little bit of a weird relationship, if you will.
Okay.
But I think Deborah felt bad for him. And Deborah's one of these people that she's very giving. She wants to help everybody else in their problems.
She allows cats to come in when they're strays, type of thing.
Okay, so let's recap the people we're talking about. We have Lyndsey Miles, 15-year-old female, just finished her freshman year. She's staying over at Deborah's house because she's best friends with Deborah's daughter, who's also 15. The next morning, they're leaving to go to Oregon, and this is on a Saturday night. And then in the house is Deborah, and then Deborah's roommate, Michael. Tracking?
Yes.
So we are on June 3rd of 2006, Saturday night.
Okay. About
Sunday morning, 4 a.m., Deborah wakes up to the sound of like a loud pop. She's not sure what it is, but it was really loud. So she jumps out of bed, and as she's walking through the house, keep in mind it's dark. When she gets in the living room, she smells something that to her smelled like burning. So she thinks something is on fire. Maybe that pop was like an electrical breaker or something causing a fire. So she immediately goes to Michael's room to get some help. Michael's not in his room. So she keeps looking for Michael. She hasn't found Michael yet. She knows he smokes a lot. So she opens the front door, and sure enough, there's Michael standing in the front yard smoking a cigarette.
Okay. Did he hear anything?
No, he's just standing there, normal, completely casual. Everything's just fine. So she explains, did you hear that? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's explaining, I think something might be on fire. I can smell something burning in the living room really bad. Can you please check the attic? And he just walks right by her, walks back to his bedroom, shuts the door pretty much right in her face. It's kind of a weird interaction.
Yeah, why wouldn't he care?
Yeah, he just had no cares at all. He just went back to his room and wasn't going to be bothered by this.
Okay.
Deborah's a little bit concerned that, I smell something, I heard something. So she starts turning on some lights and looking. And that's when she's going to run across Lyndsey.
Okay.
Lyndsey was sleeping on the couch.
In the living room.
In the living room. So when she turns on the living room light, she sees Lyndsey, and she literally can't believe what she's seeing. Lyndsey is covered in blood. Her head is just a mess. She's kind of moved where she can't see Lyndsey's face. So Deborah tries to roll Lyndsey over to check on her to see if she's okay. And we're going to get into some of these details, but there is obvious crazy head trauma. She said she tried CPR. I think that was just more of her saying, probably because she's a daycare provider, and
that she did her best.
She did her best, provide CPR, call 911. So she calls 911. immediately reporting what's happening. And she still hasn't put together what is going on here, other than just Lyndsey obviously encountered some type of crazy trauma. When the police arrive, Michael has gone back outside.
Right.
So he's literally sitting in the grass.
Smoking again.
Just smoking a cigarette. As soon as the first officer arrives, he's like, hey, is everything all right? What's going on? You know, the typical, I'm here, you called 911.
Did she call 911, Deborah?
She didn't. At some point in between all this, he just walks outside and he says, I shot her.
Just blatantly admits that he shot Lyndsey.
Right there, admits that he shot Lyndsey. So patrol obviously is going to lock the crime scene down. They take him into custody. They start interviewing Deborah. We're going to have a screw up, and we need to talk about this just a little bit. It's a good educational thing, I think, for maybe other police departments or other police officers in the general public. We have to clear a house when we secure a crime scene. And the idea there is law enforcement has the right to go through the house and make sure there's nobody in the house. Everybody get out of the house. We can't search it because we're going to preserve the crime scene for a search warrant.
The evidence is preserved as well.
Yeah, nobody can be in there messing around with things. So they're getting everybody out of the house. Well, as they do this, they're clearing Michael's bedroom to make sure there's nobody in the bedroom. And on his bed, they see a handgun.
Okay.
So one of the officers picks it up, clears it, takes the magazine out, racks it, puts it in his cargo pocket, finishes clearing the house, and then gets outside and puts it in a bag. Now, if you ask a lot of law enforcement across the country, they would say, well, what's wrong with that? He's making it safe. Trust me, a firearm sitting on a bed without anybody interacting with it is safe.
And when there's a lot of law enforcement around to guard it,
it's
to
even
protect
more
it.
safe. Yes. What a lot of officers may not realize, or just the general public, there is critical evidence on that handgun. We'll get into it here in a little bit. And just that simple act of racking it, taking out the magazine, putting it in a cargo pocket, later putting it in a plastic bag, there's all kinds of issues here.
Right, because of the blood that's on it as well.
Yeah, I remember when I first arrived on scene on this case, I heard that and I'm like, how many times do we have to have this conversation? Leave the guns alone. So we're kind of off to a bad start there.
Provides another challenge for Detective Ray.
So let's get into the investigation here. Suspect has already admitted to killing Lyndsey, shooting her in the head with a gun multiple times, and we'll get into that. He admits the gun in the bedroom was the gun that he used.
Okay.
The scene is completely consistent with that, but that doesn't alleviate the investigative side here, if that makes any sense. And I want to talk about this a little bit too. I know sometimes people will see some type of a law enforcement investigation on what appears to be a very simple crime scene.
Very straightforward. All the facts are right there in front of you.
Yeah, why would you be there for 3 days trying to investigate it?
Right.
Sometimes being able to document and capture all of the evidence and the really important evidence and being able to recreate everything to prove what didn't happen is just as important as proving what did happen.
You never know what's going to come up in trial that defense is going to throw out as a potential conspiracy theory or a real legitimate reason why somebody wasn't at the crime scene or why they felt compelled to say something upon police arrival. You have to be prepared to dispel any misinformation or things that aren't actually truthful.
Yeah, and I've seen this time and time again where, and I don't think it's intentional. I think people just fall into the trap. There's a very clear narrative of what happened, and they investigate the crime scene to confirm that narrative, instead of investigating the crime scene to just see what they can discover and let the evidence speak for itself, right? In this case, even though everything seems very, very clear, very forward, we're going to do a much deeper dive here. Okay. The other place this comes up a lot is suicides. A lot of people will say, yeah, it's suicide. He's been suicidal. There's a suicide note. There's a gun right there. He must have committed suicide. And the investigation really fails. And then family just can't accept that their loved one committed suicide. Right. And all of a sudden, there's all these other theories of how someone was killed. And I've been involved on a ton of these where I've been asked to come in and look at these afterwards. And I always get really frustrated because the investigation just sucked. Right. Because they handled it as a suicide.
And we've seen this happen as well with accidental deaths too.
Correct. I want to get into, well, what does that mean? What do we do for an investigation like this? And this is where we have our gory warning, if you will. There's no photos, but I'm going to be pretty graphic and I'm going to describe pretty clearly like what it is we're trying to find here. Number one is the rounds, the bullets themselves. They're important. They're very, very important. We can match them back to a gun. Sure, we have a guy admitting to killing Lyndsey and admitting that the gun he used was in the bed. But what if we find there's 7 rounds that were fired, from 2 different guns. That changes the entire narrative. So we have to recover the bullets. That's number 1 priority. How many were there? It's really hard sometimes to tell. He may have told us, well, I think I shot her 6 times.
Right.
But we don't know. Some people will say, well, you could just count the casings. What if he picked one up? What if one got kicked under a piece of furniture that isn't found? And those things happen all the time.
Or potentially maybe he removed rounds from the magazine after the incident happened or something like that we don't know about.
Right. You can't rely on that. So you really have to do a big analysis into the trajectory and the actual bullet reconstruction to figure out, okay, we have a hole over here. Where did it come from? Where did it go? All of that type of stuff. Sometimes just determining how many wounds somebody has can be very difficult. We have a really interesting case we're going to cover probably a couple months from now that will blow people's minds on what bullets can do in flight and how it's not always just a simple impact where you have an entry and an exit.
And we've talked a little bit about this in other episodes, but
yeah. So in this case, trying to determine how many times Lyndsey was shot is paramount. That's one of the first things. Being able to recover rounds for each one of those shots, if you will, and then trying to figure out the trajectory of where was it fired from? Where did it hit her and where did it come out?
Also, how close was the weapon to her when it was fired?
Your perfect timing there. It's almost like you saw this presentation.
I haven't.
Are you trying to cheat on me here?
No, I'm following you and I'm just adding on to things that you're saying. That's all.
So let's talk about muzzle pressure, something that may be new for some of our socialites. An AR-15, typical military style rifle. I'm not going to call it an assault rifle. I'm just going to call it a rifle. More commonly today, it's an M4. It shoots a .223, so a .223 caliber round. Muzzle pressure on that, 55,000 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of, I won't say a funny story, but an interesting story. In Vietnam, soldiers wanting to come home thought, well, if I get a gunshot wound, they'll send me home. I don't want to be here anymore. This is crazy. And they would shoot themselves in the foot or maybe in the hand with their AR-15, not realizing, the little tiny .223 round is going to pass right through your foot. It's not going to give you lifelong issues. But the 50,000 pounds of pressure that's coming out of the end of that barrel is going to pretty much blow an entirely different hole in your foot and is going to cause a lot more damage than the bullet itself.
Sure.
So it's really important to understand the pressure coming out of the barrel of a gun is extremely intense. A lot of SWAT teams will use suppressors on the M4 rifles or different types of rifles that they use in entry operations. And it's funny, I'll see people who just aren't educated in any of this stuff get really critical of, why does the police department need silencers?
Sure.
Like, what are they trying to do? And it's not a silencer, it's a suppressor. And while it does reduce the overall noise imprint, more importantly, it suppresses the muzzle velocity. And if you're ever standing next to somebody when they're firing an M4, it rocks you. Like it hurts. It'll give you headaches. It's really hard to concentrate. It's a pain in the ass. So suppressors are to suppress that muzzle velocity as much as anything else. A 9mm handgun.
That's very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, a 9mm handgun, 35,000 PSI. It's a lot. That's a lot of pressure. And why this is important is you were talking about how close a gun is. So we have contact wounds and then close contact wounds. A contact wound is when the gun is actually being pushed up against the skin when it's fired. And what people need to kind of understand, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can, because that barrel is actually sealed, if you will, up against the skin, all of that pressure goes into the skin. It won't pierce a bone per se.
Right.
And it starts to blow that skin up almost like a balloon.
Which is why it's called blowback.
Yeah. And as it blows that skin up, eventually that skin has to start ripping and tearing to alleviate the pressure.
Sure.
And it literally just blows open like a balloon would blow open. And it leaves this little starring, and we call it a star imprint, but you can actually see where the skin tore from that pressure. These are contact and close contact wounds to Lyndsey. There's 6 of them. Ultimately, what that's going to do is, I won't say it removed her scalp, but it almost removed her scalp. There's very little to see there. It's just a bloody, hairy mess.
Okay.
So the idea that, well, can't you just look at the head and see, oh, here's a hole here. It doesn't work like that, number one. Our second challenge is, even though the pressure doesn't affect the skull itself, the bone, as the bullets start to penetrate it, it's going to get skull fractures.
Okay.
And each bullet that follows the bullet before it starts to break those skull pieces off.
Yeah.
So you don't see these nice, fine, round holes. It's just a mess of broken bone and open cavities, if you will. It's terrible.
Well, and brain matter and
and then you've got hair wrapped all up in it as well, because she had fairly long hair. And then, of course, you have all the blood. It's just a mess. And, of course, she's been moved now. Some of the blood that was draining one way is now draining from the other side. It just...
It actually really complicates the crime scene quite a bit.
Incredibly. So a couple things I want to look for is, do we have the same type of ammo? That's usually a pretty good sign. Does it match the ammo that's in the bedroom? In this case, we do. The second thing is there any way to actually figure out the trajectory? Sometimes if there's only one or two shots, a lot of this reconstruction can be done at the medical examiner's office. And at the medical examiner's office, they'll actually use these rods, and they'll put these rods through the holes, and they'll take a bunch of pictures so they can say, okay, it came in at 10 degrees upper to the left, and it exited over here. And you can kind of get this three-dimensional piece.
Sure.
With this case, we're probably not going to be able to get those rods, but we also need to line it up to where she's laying on the couch. So some of this needs to be done at the crime scene. And if you'll remember several episodes ago, we can't manipulate that body yet. So we have to wait for the medical examiner. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the medical examiner, we're going to photograph everything really well. We're going to start studying the blood patterns, and we can actually see some cast off. When all that pressure hits, it actually will blow that blood back, and it's this really fine, it's what we call high velocity
spray almost.
Yeah, it's a little pinpoint pattern. With that, you can actually tell if somebody was standing next to the body. You can tell if that's the gun that was next to the body. So to your point earlier about the blowback, that's the importance of seizing that gun.
Now, did his clothing have blowback on him?
It did. Fairly significant. Now, it's tiny. I won't say it's microscopic, but it's like push pin, like a needle size. So if you, especially dark clothing, you won't notice it unless you really focus. On lighter color, like the pants I'm wearing today, you might notice it if you look very carefully. Any of these cases, the clothing just has to be seized and sent to a lab to actually be officially tested.
And did he consensually give up his clothing?
We wrote search warrants for everything. At this point, we're not going to take a chance.
On consent.
Yeah, no.
Agreed, but he didn't fight back in any way.
No, he was very cooperative right from the beginning, to the point of, I did it. Guns in there.
Okay.
Take what you want.
Oh my gosh.
I did what I did. Medical examiner arrives, and they're going to give us the go-ahead. Obviously, they have an investigator there with us, and we're going to do as much as we can to figure out the trajectory, if you will. The bullets that are still in Lyndsey, I'm not concerned about. We can get those through x-rays at the medical examiner's office, recover them there a little bit easier. What I'm worried about is the bullets that pass through Lyndsey, maybe somewhere in the couch. Keep in mind, the couch is completely blood-soaked, and there's brain matter, there's skull, there's hair.
Right.
It's not like if we move Lyndsey, we're going to see these three obvious holes in the couch. Like, it gets very graphic.
Well, and it sounds like how distorted Lyndsey was at that point. There are potential rounds that could have gone into her multiple ways, not just the same way every time. It may not have necessarily been execution style, like we talked about in Dyslexia Kills.
One of the problems is the angle that we're seeing. A lot of these are coming into the back of her head, but up towards the top of her head. It's possible they could have passed through her body cavity and be down by her hips now.
Right.
So we don't even know if they all exited. And that's where we really have to take our time in processing
recreation
that scene
of the crime scene
and documenting everything we can. And where I'm headed with this, why I'm starting to get like some more detail here. This isn't a case where law enforcement shows up and they're like, oh, she's dead. They put her in a body bag and take her to the medical examiner, and the medical examiner's office does their thing. There is an incredible amount of investigation that happens right there on the couch, and it's not something you can do from afar. You're in it. You're gloved up. You have as much personal protection on as you can, but you're digging through brain matter. You're manipulating the body to different places on the couch to line up where we believe there's holes to actually realign some of this.
Not only her body, but I think something that listeners or socialites need to be aware of is that you're also having now to almost put her head back together. To
some extent, yes. We're going to be really careful not to ruin any of that evidence. So you're very, very careful in how you're doing it. But yes, you're trying to piece back together where was she at and what did she look like before the first round hit, after the second, after the third, after the fourth. And it can get really intense. And this is where you just kind of have to flip that switch, and that work mind has to kick in and just get the job done. You have to do it right. You owe it to the family. You know, Lyndsey's family is just, could you imagine having the U-Haul packed up and you think on the way out of town you're just going to swing by,
pick up your kid,
and head to Oregon because life is great.
Pick up an Egg McMuffin on the way to the highway.
Right. Like just the devastation to a family for something like this. So you have to do it right. You have to suck it up and just do that. And I don't know that a lot of our socialites realize sometimes, there's some of these really sexy cases and there's these really technical investigations that take years to piece everything back together. But there's some of these other ones that are just senseless violence. It's a 15-year-old girl who had her whole life in front of her, and you spend your day literally digging through her brains trying to disprove any nonsense that may come of this later on. So there's a lot of side effects to some of that investigative work there. At the end of the day, we're going to wrap up this crime scene. We're able to piece most of everything back together. We're going to impound the couch just out of safety.
Just out a quick question, as it related to where the gun placement was. At the time of your investigation, were we able to identify like any stippling on her at that point?
She was too covered in blood to see. So stippling, for those of you if you're not familiar, it's that those gases, the 35,000 pounds of gases that are coming out of there.
Yeah.
They have burning soot, burning gases. There's still some of the burning gunpowder. As that's deposited on the skin, it'll actually burn into the skin. It's called stippling.
They almost look like little freckles.
Or pepper. Like think about just sprinkling some pepper on your skin.
Yes.
With certain wounds, you can see that. And the stippling pattern, it'll get bigger the further away a gun is. It'll get smaller the closer it is. So a lot of times if we see stippling, we can measure it and say, okay, we've got roughly a 3-inch diameter of stippling. We know that this gun was used. We can go test that gun and fire it at different distances and then come back and say, okay, the gun was 3 to 6 inches from her head.
But this was very difficult to identify in this case.
Yeah, it was just her head was too saturated with fluids and body fluids and brain to really be able to see that.
Yeah.
Finite, and it's in her hair. So that's the other problem. Typically, we don't get good stippling pattern. You will get a little bit of stippling pattern in hair, but it's harder to work with hair. We're going to impound the couch. That way, if we have to recreate something later on, that's the other thing people probably don't think of is we have this massive bloody couch that we've got to get out of the house without screwing it up.
And trying to find somewhere for it in the evidence room that it's safe and nobody's going to come in and mess it up.
It's not like you can call 2 men in a truck, right? Like you got to figure it out yourself.
Right.
The search in Michael's room does turn up a meth pipe on his bed, which is interesting. It looks like there may be some meth use with Michael's history.
Interesting.
Autopsy is going to confirm the stories all jive. She was shot 6 times at close contact range in the back of the head while she slept. She never woke up, which I guess in a way
it is a little relieving to consider your child in that situation. You wouldn't want them awake in those moments.
Pretty crazy. But if you also think of it like there isn't anything more innocent and vulnerable than this 15-year-old girl sleeping 4 o'clock in the morning at a friend's house.
You had daughters at that time.
I had daughters that age. And I think my daughter was graduating 8th grade. And I think that's why I always connected. It was the 8th grade graduation thing. But yeah, you talk about screwing with you for a while. My kids would be like, hey, Dad, I'm going to go spend the night at Boa. No, you're not.
You're going straight
You will get your ass home and go to your room.
Yeah. We're ordering a pizza tonight and we're watching Harry Potter together. Period.
Talk about screwed up family stuff.
Yeah, and you're going to have fun while we do it. Yeah, your friends can come here to stay the night.
Michael's going to admit to everything. He doesn't really hold back. Demons made him do it.
Probably because of the drugs that he was on.
Working a case like this is when your anger sets in later on about the gravity of the whole thing. He's legitimately batshit crazy. He's insane.
Okay.
Which changes the entire criminal investigation.
How did we identify he's insane? Had he gone to therapy before and this had been identified in him, or was this therapeutic sessions afterwards for
enough. He'd had enough types of treatment. I'm thinking through the VA and maybe the Veterans Administration that he had been diagnosed with being bipolar and possibly schizophrenic. After this, he's examined by 3 different psychiatrists who all come back with he is mentally insane. I believe he was psychotic is what they came up with. Okay. Which makes you ask, how did he get the gun? He owned the gun. It was in his name.
Well, there is no mental health examination before somebody can buy a gun.
Isn't that weird?
That is
let's talk about that a little. There's also private party sales.
I don't know. I feel like we're becoming very opinionated right now. We should be careful with that.
That you shouldn't sell guns to crazy people?
No, I think that's very legitimate, but...
I think everybody can agree on this.
No, I do think everybody can agree on this. And this is a very big deal, right? It's talked about a lot in our society right now. And it is very important to take into consideration that we shouldn't sell guns to crazy people. But how do you vet a crazy person before they go into one? and ask for a gun.
And you have private party sales. I can sell a gun to anybody I want privately any day.
You also have HIPAA and all these crazy medical things that we can't talk about.
We chase this down a little bit, but at the end of the day, you hit it right on the head. There is no law that requires any type of a mental evaluation per se before someone buys a gun. And if it's private party to private party, there's really nothing in place. And I know it's a hot topic, but I also think it's worth
talking about. It's worth creating a discussion around. And even if we do get horrible comments from our listeners that nobody should have guns, or it doesn't matter, everybody has a right to a gun, it is worth discussing so that everybody's health and rights are maintained, right?
So I thought about this.
Okay, go.
And I strategically planned a couple of episodes. So this is part 1. We're going to get the whole case in. So those of you who just heard that, don't panic. You're going to hear the whole case today. You don't have to wait till next week.
Yeah.
But next week's episode is going to be the exact opposite of maybe why you should own a gun. So we can present both sides of the coin.
This is interesting. I like that you did that.
But in this case, it is clear Michael should not have had a gun. He should not have been sold a gun. There needs to be better things in place because it was known that he was bipolar, that he potentially had already been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Maybe the mix of those is very dangerous to the general society.
Especially when you're on meth.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what gets me on these cases. There is no justice on a case like this. Everybody loses 15 different ways. So the 3 psychologists, like I said, are going to come together. They're going to confirm he is legally insane. He's going to plead guilty to the crime of murder by reason of insanity. He's going to receive a life sentence to be served in the Arizona State Mental Hospital, which is really scary.
That is scary. So I feel like the mental health institutions are not a very good place for a highly erratic killer like that.
Weird you're saying that. We're going to transition for just a second.
Okay.
In the state of Arizona, we have the state hospital. Anybody who is found guilty of committing a crime by reason of insanity, that's where they go when they get whatever prison sentence they are. Those patients are overseen by the State of Arizona Psychiatric Review Board.
Okay.
This is the board, kind of like a parole board. This is the board that reviews cases, decides if you ever get released back into the wild, maybe you go to a group home, whatever happens.
Okay.
What are you laughing at?
There's going to be a lot of people who don't like that statement, but it
is what it is.
It is what
keep
it is,
listening if you don't. You're about to agree with me.
I always really take into consideration listener comments when these start coming in. When you say things
I love listener comments.
Yeah.
Keep them coming. Meet and determine if and when a patient is released. Fairly simple, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to talk, again, we're transitioning. We'll come back to Lyndsey here in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about another individual, Christopher Lambeth, Lambeth. He's out of Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
In 2005, he was 20. He killed both of his grandparents. Christopher has a lot of mental issues. He was being a little bit unruly with his mom, so mom moves him in with grandparents.
I remember this case.
It got a lot of traction, a lot of news. He ends up brutally killing parents. His grandparents. Yeah. They never release how many stab wounds. I don't think they were ever able to figure out just how many there were.
Oh my gosh.
When he got done killing, he killed them in their bed, by the way.
While they were asleep? Do they know?
I think so. I don't know. But they're in bed.
Okay.
He covers them back up. He goes back to bed.
Oh my
for
gosh.
2 days.
Oh.
Sunday comes around. Grandparents are normally in church. They don't show up to church. Enough people in the church are a little bit worried. One of them drives by the house just to check on them.
And I'm sure people in the church know that they have this grandson who is a little wacko.
Yeah. When they drive over to the house to check on him, all the windows are broken. The blinds are pulled off. The house is just a mess. They don't go in, but they're looking through the windows and something's not right. So they call the local deputies. Sheriff deputies show up. There's 2 dogs in the house who clearly haven't been let out in days.
Defecating everywhere in the house.
Yeah,
the house is even more of a mess because of the dogs.
Mess. So as the deputies start clearing the house, the first bedroom they come to is Christopher's. And he's in bed asleep. They have to wake him up.
What had he been doing all this time?
Just hanging out.
Playing video games?
Yeah. And then as they are making contact with him, he admits that he killed his grandparents. They're in the next room. And they go to the next room and sure enough, pull the blanket back and just discover this horrific scene.
Who thought it was a good idea to send him from a parent who couldn't control him to his grandparents' house?
I'm pretty sure at this point, everybody's, including the parents who made that decision, are questioning that, right? Like, I think it became very obvious this kid is out of control.
Yeah.
But he pleads guilty by reason of insanity. He gets 2 life sentences, not one. He gets 2 life sentences, sentenced to the Arizona State Hospital.
Okay.
In August of 2020, 14 years after he arrived on his 2 life sentence, if you will, the board decides it's time to release him. Let's put him back into public, see if we can reintegrate him into society.
Again, what made them think this would be a good idea?
He just needs another chance. It's not his fault. He's crazy. There's a lot of people that will support this, believe it or not. There's a lot of people that would say, it's not his fault. He's crazy. Let's get him the help he needs, and let's see if we can get him to
I'm not going to yuck anybody else's yum, but I'm very concerned about it.
As you should be. So they send him to a group home in Tucson that has 24/7 staff that monitors. They're basically patients at this point, but they're in a group home. Well, Christopher gets to the group home. And he's like, I got to be honest with you guys, not really the vibe I was looking for.
Oh my gosh.
Is there any chance I could be transferred to a different group home? Because there's these other group homes where the staff is only there for 8 hours.
Okay.
And then you get more independence. Like I can live on my own.
Did he say to the review board why he didn't like living there?
He just didn't like all the people around him. So he wanted his own room. He wanted more independence. He just wanted to be him.
And they thought this will be a very good learning for him. This will help him reintegrate back into
society. So the board, without consulting with a single psychologist who has ever met with Christopher, who's ever talked to Christopher, the board, within a vacuum, approved Christopher's request.
Okay.
And they moved him to a group home in Gilbert.
Oh my gosh.
You may remember the name of these group homes, Tilda Manor.
Yes.
We had incident after incident after incident, and this should scare the hell out of people.
Well, these group homes are in just regular, average neighborhoods. Nobody.
It's just a normal house. It's not a group home. It's a house.
It's a house. Nobody in the neighborhood knows what type of people are being put there. And I wonder if have there ever been sex offenders placed into these
Absolutely.
homes? So not only
they have to register.
They are registered sex offenders.
Yes, they have to register.
We think and hope that they are.
Don't get me wrong, sex offenders are terrible, but so are like serial killer crazed
and
people.
Sociopaths.
Yeah, probably just
so
as
now
bad.
We have in these bedroom communities, well, throughout the state actually, and Gilbert, middle class, average neighborhood, you have sociopaths, serial killers, and sex offenders all
grouped into one
in one place in the middle of
literally next door,
where there's little kids riding their bikes.
Yeah, there was 12 of them in Gilbert at one point, and I remember a handful of calls that Gilbert PD had to deal with Tilda Manor. They never had the right staff. Well, staff's only there 8 hours a day to begin with.
Yeah, they're not there 24 hours.
Yeah, if any of these people within these group homes get a little bit out of whack, they just call the police department. So, we keep showing up, and over time, it starts to become an issue of, hey, what the hell are you guys doing?
And not only are police showing up to try to figure out the mess that's going on in these places, because they're not documented. Right. There's no history to look back on what's taking place in these locations. You are literally showing up sometimes as a law enforcement officer, not realizing where you're going.
Yeah, because it's just a residential house. Right. So Christopher is going to make it about 8 months before he kills somebody. He's going to kill his roommate.
Why?
Just snapped and killed him.
Just didn't like him. Left his underwear on the ground.
I don't even know if it was that much. There is video, and I'm not going to include it in here, but there's video on the internet. People are really interested. It's Christopher Lambeth, Lambeth, Lambeth. Mm-hmm. When they book him into jail, they put him in like his little jail outfit. They put him in a holding room with another inmate. He doesn't know this other inmate. He's never met him. They're both sitting on benches, probably 5 or 6 feet apart from each other. No talking, no anything. All of a sudden, Lambeth gets up, goes over, and just starts beating the holy hell out of the other guy.
Oh my God.
The deputies have to come in and pull him off, so he gets another aggravated assault charge on top of him on there. The kid's just out of freaking control is the point here. I don't want to defend him, but at the same point, he is crazy. So maybe it was predictable. Like maybe we knew.
Batshit crazy.
Yes. This caused a big stir, and the governor actually is going to get involved because what they found is the board wasn't really maintaining records properly.
Okay.
I'm not going to name her. The executive director, the staff part of this board who kind of runs the day-to-day operations, she graduated from Grand Canyon University. This was her first job.
Like,
after graduation.
Graduate with like a literature degree?
I don't know, but she's young. She has no experience dealing with these type of predators. And she is the executive director.
Oh my goodness.
So there's a ton of issues.
Not that there's anything wrong with the literature degree, because I actually have a minor but I'm just thinking that in no way prepares you for a job with that. I don't want
I think your point is one experience doesn't cover the other.
Right.
There needs to be some common sense here.
Yes.
Luckily, the governor is going to shut the board down, so the board no longer operates. But the idea here is that even though you get sentenced to the mental health hospital, it's a different set of rules than prison. You can get 2 life sentences, and 14 years later, you're out in the wild. Right. And that's why I was saying out in the wild, because that's what it is. You're releasing this predator back into the wild. What is he going to do? Probably what predators do.
Strike again.
Right. Obviously, there is some concern about Michael going to the state hospital, right?
Well, because he could be easily released as well on some whim of the board.
He possibly, but I'm really confident that he's not going anywhere.
How do you know that?
He died.
Oh, that's good. When?
In 2013. Which brings up the last part of our episode.
How did he die? Lambeth?
We don't know. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe he saw Lambeth. It's possible they would have crossed paths in there for sure.
Well, I could totally see them because I was around the same time, actually potentially being in the same group home.
So Lambeth and Michael were in the state hospital together, like in 2010, 2011, 2012, all the same time frame. And when I discovered that Michael was dead, I really tried to dig into it, and I opened up this whole other Pandora's box. The state hospital doesn't report deaths. You don't know if it's a homicide. You don't know if it's a suicide. You don't know if it's a natural death. This whole piece of the hospital blew up in 2023, where now there's this major investigation, and they're only going back to 2015 right now. But they found that the state hospital isn't reporting different types of deaths when it comes to suicide and homicides.
It's the perfect place to release a serial killer.
It is so nuts.
Oh my God.
What I want to kind of conclude, there was a method to the madness of going through all this. When I was saying the frustration on a case like this is what happens to poor Lyndsey and, the family trying to seek some type of justice.
There is no justice.
When you combine the justice system with the mental health system, it is the perfect storm of just chaos and shitty ran facilities. There is no justice. There's nothing. Granted, he dies, which I have to believe is probably a little bit of reassuring to the family that
maybe.
He won't ever do this again. But at the same time, it's just a mess. There's no happy ending, which is why you wear a toucan shirt and you just suck it up and move on.
Yeah. I'm glad you wore the toucan shirt. Okay, well, I'm excited to see how next week's episode takes some twists and turns with this entire gun control topic.
I definitely wanted to show 2 sides of the coin here. And obviously on this one, I am for common sense gun control, that we shouldn't let mentally handicapped, the mental health people out there possess firearms. I think that's reasonable.
Right, 100%. Join us next week, socialites, for Vulnerable Moments.
How many times have you been home alone and you wash your hair a little bit fast because you're just not comfortable keeping your eyes closed and being that vulnerable? Shelly doesn't know Chuck is even in the state.
He's been waiting. He's been lying in wait.
He's going to kill them both in front of each other. Tick tock. The clock just starts running, essentially.